My girlfriend texted me about a late gym session, and I responded with a simple, okay. When I arrived at the parking lot, I spotted her car alongside her trainer. In a moment of impulse, I tipped the valet $100 to box in their vehicle. Now they were trapped, and she wouldn't cease her calls. At 32 years old, I had always been a creature of habit. I preferred my life similar to my coffee: strong, predictable, and free from unwelcome surprises. For 5 years, Jacqueline, who is 30, had been an integral part of my routine. Together, we crafted a life in a lovely apartment, characterized by large windows and a granite countertop that we both took immense pride in. It was a solid, stable existence. However, the arrival of Christian changed everything. Christian, her personal trainer, possessed a dazzling smile with teeth as white as a picket fence and a limited vocabulary that revolved around phrases like crush it, reps, and synergy. A few months back, Jacqueline began mentioning him more frequently. Christian says I'm not engaging my core, she would say. Christian thinks I'd benefit from intermittent fasting. It felt as if Christian had become a ghost haunting our apartment at 7:15 p.m. My phone buzzed again with a message from Jacqueline. Going to be a late gym session. Christian is killing me with a new leg day routine. A small nagging feeling of unease emerged within me. She had always disliked leg day and typically sent two exclamation marks in her texts. It was one of our quirky couple rituals. In a moment of defiance against my usual routine, I made a decision I had never considered before. I drove to the gym. This establishment was one of those upscale places with a restaurant attached, where patrons often wore more makeup to exercise than they would for weddings. Upon arrival, I noticed that her car was not in the main lot, but rather tucked away in the restaurant's valet-only section. Sitting in the passenger seat with the windows fogged in a way that had nothing to do with the cool evening air was Christian. I couldn't discern much beyond their silhouettes, but the scene was unmistakable. Surprisingly, my initial reaction wasn't anger. It was a profound stillness. A chilling clarity enveloped my thoughts. I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. My aim shifted from preservation to management of the situation. I parked across the street and observed for a moment before approaching the valet stand, where a young college-aged attendant was engrossed in his phone. "Excuse me?" I said, pulling out my wallet and placing a crisp $100 bill on the podium in front of him. His eyes widened in surprise. "Do you see that blue sedan over there and the large black SUV next to it?" He nodded, suddenly all ears. "I need you to find the biggest, most obnoxiously large truck in this lot," I instructed calmly. "Park it directly behind them, so closely that they can't even think about leaving bumper to bumper. Consider it a geometry problem." He looked back and forth between the money and me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Yes, sir, geometry problem. I can manage that." Afterwards, I returned home, poured myself a whiskey, and sat on the couch we had chosen together, waiting. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with Jacqueline's name. I let it ring until it stopped, only for another text to come in. "Hey, where are you? My car's blocked in. It's insane. Some idiot parked a monster truck behind me. Are you home? Please pick up." The calls started again, one after the other. As I watched the screen illuminate with her name flashing like a warning light, it was oddly captivating to witness the predictable escalation of her manufactured panic. Soon, another number appeared, and I answered the call, placing it on speaker. "Hello? Hey man, this is Christian," he said, his voice tense and laced with irritation. "Jacqueline's phone is about to die, and we're kinda stuck here." "Oh, that's unfortunate," I replied, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "How did that happen?" Christian continued. "Some valet parked this massive truck right behind her car. The kid who did it is long gone, and the manager is just giving us the runaround, saying the valet company is a separate contractor. It's a whole mess. I couldn't help but think to myself that the kid had certainly earned that $100. He had bought both the action and the plausible deniability. I asked, keeping my tone light. A moment of silence extended on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears in his head turning, the ones not focused on squat form. Well, we were just grabbing a post-workout smoothie, he stammered. At 9 p.m. in her car in the valet lot, I pressed. Listen, man, can you just come get her or something? This is ridiculous. The sheer entitlement in his voice was almost amusing, as if I were his personal Uber driver. I don't think I can, I said, a genuine pang of pain cutting through my cold demeanor. I'm busy. With that, I hung up. Jacqueline's calls started flooding in immediately. I chose to ignore them as she switched to texting. I can't believe you're doing this. What is wrong with you? I'm stranded. We are going to talk about this. You've lost your mind. Her final text confirmed my suspicions. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the situation. It's just the assertion that I had lost my sanity. In her mind, the narrative was already unfolding. I was the irrational, jealous boyfriend, while they were the innocent victims of a parking mishap. Little did they know their confinement was just beginning. The box they were in was far larger than they could ever imagine. Update 1. The confrontation the following morning was a masterclass in deflection. Jacqueline didn't confess. She accused. You followed me? You embarrassed me. You have serious trust issues. She spun a tale that Christian's car wouldn't start and that he was merely waiting with her for a tow truck. It was a stark contrast to what he had told me on the phone. Amateurs. The atmosphere in our apartment grew thick and toxic, like a heavy fog. We were mere ghosts haunting the same space. I couldn't eat or sleep. After 3 days of this silent Cold War, I realized I couldn't stay. I need some space, Jacqueline, I told her. I'm going to stay with a friend for a bit. I noticed a flicker of relief in her eyes, quickly masked by a facade of concern. If that's what you think is best, she said softly, they let me go, believing my departure was a sign of surrender. A friend who lived in our building called me 4 days later. Hey, not to be weird, but has that gym guy Christian moved in? His ridiculously large SUV has been parked in your designated spot for 2 days straight. So that was their strategy, not to engage in a messy confrontation, but to patiently wait for me to retreat and then fortify their position. They intended to let me abandon the territory, then claim it as their own. It was a calculated, insidious plan. But my departure wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic maneuver. While they played house, I quietly made my own deliberate moves. The first target was small, yet symbolic. In our living room hung a large, expensive piece of abstract art we had purchased together, which we called the Chromatic Aberration. Although we had split the cost, I had bought it on my credit card, and she had transferred her half to me. The receipt, the original invoice, and the credit card statement were all in my name. I went down to the county courthouse and filed a writ of replevin, a legal action to recover personal property. The filing fee was $75. Okay, the clerk said, stamping the forms. We'll get the other parties served within the next 10 business days. You'll receive a court date in the mail, likely in about 6 to 8 weeks. The wheels of justice may grind slowly, but they do grind. This wasn't merely about the painting. It was about establishing a precedent, about documentation, and about showing them that I wouldn't be playing by their rules of emotional gaslighting. 2 feelings, focusing solely on evidence. They believed this was a domestic dispute. They had no idea it was about to escalate into a paperwork war. Update 2. They escalated, which I anticipated, but I didn't expect them to be so viciously creative. They weaponized the system against me with a level of brilliance that was both terrifying and impressive. Last Tuesday, 2 police officers showed up at my friend's apartment. My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. They were responding to a harassment complaint filed by Christian Vance. He claimed I had been driving by the apartment, making threatening gestures, and had left a disturbing note on his car. It was pure fabrication. I hadn't been within 5 miles of the place. The officers were professional, yet firm, taking my statement. It was evident it was a he said, she said situation. Just stay away from the property and from him. Sir, let things cool down, one officer advised. That police report was merely the first stage. 3 days later, I was served. Jacqueline had used that flimsy police report as grounds to file for a temporary restraining order. She claimed, to be in fear for her safety due to my increasingly erratic and obsessive behavior. The judge, upon seeing a woman claiming to be scared of her ex-boyfriend, readily granted the order. The TRA was legally binding, prohibiting me from coming within 100 yards of Jacqueline and our shared apartment. They had done it. They had twisted the law to legally bar me from my own home. That evening, my landlord, Mr. Arthur, called me. His tone was frosty and detached as he spoke. "I've received a copy of a restraining order," Mr. Arthur, my landlord, informed me. "According to the order, you are legally prohibited from accessing the property. I must comply with the court's directives. We can discuss the future of the lease after your formal hearing, but until then, my hands are tied." In that moment, I felt a deep sense of defeat wash over me. It was a checkmate move on their part. I was now legally exiled, forced to pay rent on an apartment I could no longer enter, while my ex and her new partner took residence there, all at my expense. For a day, the cold dread returned, the feeling of being outmaneuvered. But vulnerability is merely a data point. It reveals where one's weaknesses lie. My weakness was being barred from my home, yet their weakness was the flimsy foundation upon which their entire scheme rested. One built on gross unprofessionalism. I resolved to shift my focus away from the apartment and instead directed my attention to Elysian Fitness, Christian's employer. I sat down and composed a calm, professional email to their corporate HR department with the subject line, "Formal Complaint," regarding professional conduct of employee Christian Vance and resulting legal complications. In the email, I laid out the timeline of events, explaining that I was the long-term partner of his client, Jacqueline, and detailing how he had moved into the apartment we had shared. I attached the piece de resistance, a scanned copy of the temporary restraining order with Jacqueline as the petitioner and me as the respondent. I wrote, "Mr. Vance's decision to move in with his client has led to this extreme legal situation where he is now a resident in a home from which I think Khaleesi have been legally barred based on a complaint he initiated. This represents a staggering conflict of interest and a severe breach of the professional boundaries expected of your staff. This situation is causing significant legal and financial distress, all stemming from the unprofessional relationship initiated and escalated by your employee. I refrain from calling them liars or becoming overly emotional. Instead, I frame the situation as a corporate liability issue, employing their language, conflict of interest, legal complications, liability. The response I received was swifter than I could have anticipated. Within 24 hours, I got a call from a senior VP of Human Resources. She sounded as if she had swallowed nails for breakfast. She was horrified not from a moral standpoint, but from a business perspective, she was apoplectic. She assured me that a full and immediate investigation was being launched and thanked me. For my discretion, the board was set. They had made a powerful move, but they had overextended themselves. They had drawn the law into this situation, and now I had brought their employer into it. 'Twas time to see whose pieces would remain standing. Final update, it was over. The conclusion wasn't marked by a single dramatic explosion, but rather a series of controlled demolitions that brought their shared fantasy crashing down over the course of 8 long weeks. First came the TRO hearing. In a sterile courtroom, Jacqueline, coached by Christian, delivered a tearful performance about fearing for her safety. When it was my turn, I remained calm and factual. I didn't argue or get emotional. I presented evidence, phone records showing I had never called her after she instructed me not to. GPS data from my phone demonstrating that I was never near the apartment when Christian claimed I was harassing him, and the supposedly threatening note they couldn't produce. My lawyer methodically dismantled their narrative, exposing it as a transparent ploy to gain exclusive control of the apartment. The judge, seeing no credible evidence of a threat, dissolved the restraining order. Victory 2 weeks later. We appeared for our small claims hearing regarding the chromatic aberration. The situation had a sense of dark humor to it. Christian was once again at Jacqueline's side, whispering in her ear. When it was my turn, I simply handed the judge the relevant documents: the invoice, my credit card statement, the bank transfer. He barely glanced at them before turning to Jacqueline and asking, "He paid for it. You paid him for half. Do you want to buy out his half?" Jacqueline, flustered from her previous loss at the trial hearing, sputtered, "This is harassment." "It's ours," the judge interjected. "I rule in favor of the plaintiff. Schedule a time to retrieve your property." With a bang of his gavel, it was another victory's maul perhaps, but an official document proving my case. These court judgments were merely the beginning. The real damage was unfolding elsewhere. Elysian Fitness. The HR investigation proceeded swiftly and ruthlessly, just as I had hoped. A premium gym cannot afford to have trainers who engage in affairs with clients, move in with them, and then get embroiled in restraining orders and police reports. The copy of the TRAW I had sent them was the final nail in Christian's coffin. It served as concrete proof of his extreme unprofessionalism. He was terminated for gross professional misconduct and actions that brought the company into disrepute. His income, the very foundation of their plans, vanished. Next, I approached my landlord, armed with the dissolved TRAW and the small claims judgment. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Arthur, presenting him with the documents while also informing him that Christian Vance was no longer employed by Elysian Fitness. Due to the circumstances surrounding my case, the narrative flipped instantly. I was no longer seen as the unstable ex. I had become the wrong tenant, vindicated by the court. They were now the ones who had lied and lost their source of income. Mr. Arthur, fearing potential legal repercussions from me for the initial hassle, promptly served them with a 30-day notice to either requalify based solely on Jacqueline's meager income, which would be impossible, or vacate the premises. As the social circles shifted, the truth unraveled. My friend from the building shared the news about Christian moving in the moment I left. Our mutual friend Jean observed the entire situation with clarity. My quiet, factual success in court stood in stark contrast to the dramatic false narrative Jacqueline had been spinning. People began to see them for who they truly were. Their support system evaporated. The end came when Jacqueline called me one last time from a blocked number. She was crying not tears of remorse, but tears of rage. "I hope you're happy," she sobbed. "You've ruined everything. Christian lost his job. We're being evicted. All because you couldn't handle being left. You destroyed our lives." I waited for her to finish, allowing the silence to stretch. "I didn't do anything, Jacqueline," I replied, my voice steady. "I just followed the rules. You're the ones who tried to break them. I merely filled out the paperwork." With that, I hung up and blocked the number. I moved back into the apartment last weekend. It felt quiet in a way it hadn't in ages. I had movers retrieve the chromatic aberration, deciding I didn't want it anymore. The symbolism felt a bit too obvious. I planned to sell it and use the proceeds for a long vacation. They weren't tragic figures who learned a lesson. They were simply bitter people who were bested at their own game. And that was perfectly fine. The silence in my apartment is different now. It's not the loud, tense silence of a relationship dying, simply quiet, the calm after the storm. For the first time in months, it feels like my own space. Justice doesn't always make a grand entrance. Sometimes it's just the sound of paperwork being filed correctly.